One of the things that is interesting about all professions is the dichotomy between the way amateurs perceive the profession to be and the way professionals actually know that the profession is. In trading, this dichotomy or schism opens itself up around the field of investor psychology. You'll find that amateurs sit there and they will argue for hours endlessly as to whether your RSI should be 12 or should it be 14. Should the line that represents the RSI be blue or be red? Professionals take a different view. What they say is a basic system is a basic system. What is important is what drives the system, how the operator interacts with the system. And a lot of investor psychology revolves around the notion of money scripts, people's relationship to money, things they might have learned from their parents, reasons as to why they might not take stops, reasons why they take profit, reasons as to why they are frightened of success in general. And by and large, as a rule, people are frightened of success in general. But there is a wider, more holistic view of what I would call trader mental health. And it seems particularly germane at present to discuss this with the notion of what's occurring with COVID-19. Traders by and large are not immune from the mental health issues that affect the wider population. And mental illness, quite rightly, has become a hot topic of late because it is an illness that does a great deal of damage and causes a great deal of distress to people. Now, none of this that I'm about to sort of pontificate on is advice. It's merely my observations of myself and others that I've noticed over more decades than I care to remember of doing this. But the thing I want to be careful of is slipping into the notion of medicalising what aren't normal human emotions. Too often I think people instantly, the moment they feel what is I would consider a normal emotion, give it a label, a term. They term it depression. People I've known who've had perfectly stable existences all of a sudden have PTSD, probably because their recycling bin wasn't emptied on a Wednesday. And I don't want to go down that road because depression, PTSD and the like are very serious topics and they are best dealt with by professionals. What I want to do is to look at some of the problems that afflict traders in general in terms of just a very, very broad overview. And these are in no particular order of importance at all. They're just simply observations that pop into my head. The first thing I want to talk about is fatigue. Fatigue is a natural consequence of our interaction with the market. You should expect to become fatigued. You should expect to be sick of trading. You hear all this nonsense of people who say, oh, I can't wait to get up and trade all day. Bullshit. Everybody gets sick of what they do. And trading, if done properly, is a grind. If it is not a grind where you are systematic in what you do, where you do the same thing day in, day out, then you're doing it incorrectly. And you're doing it for entertainment. You've fallen into that trap that, look, I'll be honest, I'd say the vast majority of investors fall into. Trading becomes a game. It is something they do for fun, for a hobby. And we can see this at present with the sudden rise in interest in day trading in the US at present. It seems that day trading has become the hobby of the day. What else are you going to do whilst you're stuck in lockdown? You can probably learn a language, learn an instrument, learn how to work Excel properly, learn how to be a better person, get fitter, get thinner. I can think of a raft of things to do rather than day trade. So fatigue is a problem. And the shorter your focus in terms of the time frame you trade, the more likely it is that this fatigue will set in. And fatigue occurs simply because of the large number of decisions you're making. You're constantly being hit by a barrage of information, and somehow your brain has to digest that information and make a decision on it. I've known people who've attempted to trade 200-300 different instruments on an hourly system, which means every hour you're making hundreds of separate decisions, and you can't afford to skip one, because the one you skip will either be the one that does brilliantly well, or is the one that if you don't pay attention to that you've already got, devastates your account. So expect fatigue, but that's a normal emotion. You can't medicalise fatigue and all of a sudden say, I'm tired, I've got PTSD. No, you just need to suck it up and have a look at what you're doing. Think about your methodology, think about the way you trade, think about the way you interact with the market. They're all logical things to do. The second thing is this notion of comparison to others. In this age of social media, we have this horrible tendency to want to try and present the best life we have or we imagine on social media. Now, this doesn't affect my generation, probably doesn't affect yours, but it will affect your children. But also in many ways, traders who populate Twitter are probably complete and utter bullshitters. Let me give you an example. 1,000 years ago, when internet forums were a very, very new thing, I used to be involved in powerlifting. And powerlifting has this sort of wonderful thing where people will pop up, and they always talk in pounds because they're largely American. They would go, squatted 500 pounds for 10 reps. How much do you weigh? I'm 14, I weigh 135 pounds. Yeah, bullshit, you did. You're so weak you can't even pick up your clothes off the floor when your mother tells you to. Most of what you see on social media is false. It's designed to be that way. So when you hear these notions of people making 1,000% per month, unfortunately for some reason people don't apply the common sense test to that and go, well, if they started off with $1,000 or even less, by the end of the year they'd be one of the richest people in the world, and by the 13th month they'd be the richest person in history. But that notion of applying common sense to that disappears. It's simply not a consideration. And this is an intriguing thing about traders and approaching markets. It seems that common sense disappears. If you, for example, saw a teenager out the front, the teenager said to you, I can pick your car up and put it over my head. You go, yeah, mate, nick off, you're an idiot. But if you saw someone on social media who said, look, I made 500,000% on this morning in an hour, you'd go, shit, how'd you do that? Why aren't I doing that? I feel really bad because I'm not doing that. Therefore, I must be a failure. No, you're an idiot for being taken in. It's as simple as that. But people turn to social media because of the notion of isolation. Trading is an individual endeavour. It is something we do by ourselves. We do it in the isolation of our study, wherever you want to do it. But it is done by the individual. It's not done by a group. There is none of that incidental contact you get at work. At work you have incidental contact, where you bump into people in the corridor, you bump into people in the tea room, you bump into people in the lift. In trading, there's none of that. You're simply by yourself. And the repeat of the lockdown we're going through has exacerbated that, because additional incidental contact you might have got throughout the day is simply by going down to your local coffee shop and sitting there for half an hour has disappeared. That's been taken away from people. So isolation is a problem. But the issue is not to look at sort of a false environment for some sort of solace for that isolation. You have to work on mechanisms for doing it yourself. But it is quite acceptable to feel shitty about your trading results. It's quite acceptable to understand that you will experience disappointment. But simply because you're disappointed does not mean you're depressed. That unfortunately is diminishing people who truly are depressed and who suffer from that awful illness. You're just suffering from the normal notions of fatigue, burnout, poor performance. They happen to everyone in every profession. It's simply the way it is. And you need to find mechanisms of dealing with those very ordinary emotions. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't traders out there who do not suffer from mental health issues. What I am saying is that the majority of us just simply suffer from normal day-to-day fatigue. Life can sometimes be a shit. And as far as I'm concerned, if you could rule a line through 2020 and we all start again on January 1st, 2021, that would be a really good thing. But we can't. We have to find a mechanism to get through. So in terms of what I've seen that works, what works for me, the first thing that works is routine. Many people perceive, for some strange reason, probably because of media exposure, that trading is something that you simply make up as you go along. No, you don't. You do the same thing in the same way every day at the same time. It has to be that way. But that routine needs to be extended to every other aspect of your life. People who lead very, very ramshackle lives, and by that I mean they go to bed at different times, get up at different times, eat at different times, whilst they think they have enormous variety in their lives, and they console themselves with that, what they're actually doing is setting the groundwork for underperformance, and underperformance in everything they do. So routine is not only a function of trading, it's a function of every aspect of your life. And your trading slots into that routine. But the routine, and in particular in terms of maintaining emotional and mental equilibrium, needs to cover things such as exercise. It needs to cover things such as sleep. If you're not sleeping anywhere between 7.5 and 8.5 hours a night, you're doing it wrong. And you probably need to get that seen to. You probably need to have someone look at your notion of sleep hygiene. What you do before you go to bed. Because if traders had a superpower, if athletes had a superpower, and athletes recognize this, it is sleep. Whenever you see athletes getting on a plane, you see something very interesting. If you to ask people a question, say, what do athletes take with them on a plane? People would say, oh, things like iPad, earphones, whatever. No, they always take a pillow. They always take their own pillow because they realise how important that this notion of sleep hygiene, of routine is. And so we have a collection of things. We have exercise simply because it clears and clarifies the mind. I don't care if exercise for you is walking around the block, but it is a mechanism that clears the mind. Humans were built to move. This is something that vast numbers of the population seem to rebel against, but humans were actually built to move. We are at our most efficient moving. You need a tribe, a group who can support you. And I'm not talking, again, we come back to the bullshitters on social media. I'm not talking about that because they're simply rubbish and they will do your mental health no good whatsoever. And we come back to the notion of sleep. So it's really a simple solution. You have an umbrella concept. The umbrella concept is routine. Under that umbrella sits a series of subsets. Exercise, your tribe, who you communicate with, who is what I would term a plus one. And in another video, I'll talk about what I mean by a plus one. That is, sort of in simple terms, somebody who adds something to your existence. And it doesn't matter what it is, they add something. And we have sleep, but I'll throw in an additional pillar there. I'll throw in the pillar of food. Humans are machines, and like a machine, they require the right fuel. There is simply no way known that I would have taken one of my cars and stuck basic unleading in it. Whilst the engine management system and the computer could deal with it, there's simply no way I'd bother doing it. And people would ask why, when they'd say that the engine management system can cope with it. And my response is, humans can cope with eating shit all day, every day for 50 years, right up until the moment they can't, and then it stops. And there is no way known I would do that to a piece of machinery that I've paid a friggin' fortune for, because it's simply not the right thing to do. So again, these are just observations. And a final point, and an immensely final point. And if Louise were doing this, this is a point she would make. Journal. You must write down your thoughts. You must write down what you want to do. A thought is meaningless without action. It simply exists in the abstract morass of your own brain. But the moment you write it down, it has some form of currency, some form of power. Journaling is immensely powerful, as is writing letters to yourself. Things you want to do, things you want to say to yourself. Accept that you are going to have to defrag your brain, and accept that trading psychology is much more than simply going, well, my parents taught me that rich people were thieves. No, trading psychology is this holistic unit within which you exist that encompasses everything you think, say, or do, and everything you think, say, or do in relation to everybody else. Trading becomes much easier and life becomes much easier once you accept that we are an integrated unit, and that unit has a series of inputs that you need to manage. So yes, you might have moved from the notion that sitting around talking about indicators for hours on forums is a complete utter waste of time. So you might have evolved from that, but you might have only evolved to the stage where you think that, well, I have a good relationship with money, I understand my money scripts, that's it. Because unfortunately, that's not the entire picture.